Wait, why is it like this? Because the camera gets blocked. Wait.
I don't know.
Because the camera gets blocked.
My camera's blocked?
Yours is too. See on the bottom?
It's just...
It's foggy. Oh, is that the thing?
It's just faded like that.
It's just the Facebook.
It's
the
just the stupid
Facebook.
Facebook. As my grandma used to call it, the book face.
Hi, everyone. That was my chair just now. See,
I'm
look,
gonna
I can do it
start
again.
this too.
All right.
Um,
Well,
It is that time.
it is
What time
every
is it?
week. Hammer time.
That's the best
Cheers.
answer ever. That
Hammer
one's
time.
working double time. So today is, of course, Wine Wednesday in real estate. And we are going to kind of take Wine Wednesday in real estate down a different path.
Different path.
If you will, today.
We're discussing something. I don't know what. It's as new to me as it is to you all.
It's a surprise.
It's a surprise.
So we're going to tackle some legal issues that have come up in the course of a particular, I guess this is kind of a recurring theme issue that might come up in real estate.
Yes.
And I think a lot of people get caught up in the MLS
Yes.
in shopping on a per square foot basis, if you will.
Okay.
You know, like this house is, I need at least 2,000 square feet. You know,
Right.
you hear people say that, right?
Yeah, I need to. Yeah, all the time.
And
I used to ask that. I don't anymore.
yeah, well, I don't really either
Yeah.
because there's ultimately going to be a sacrifice or a
Right.
compromise,
Right.
and a lot of times square footage is that compromise. Because 2,000 square feet in one house might be perfectly acceptable, but then you go to another house and the layout of how that 2,000 square feet is configured
2,000
changes everything, right?
2,000 square feet in a ranch is much different
Yes.
than 2,000 square feet in a two-story.
Or maybe
So.
3 bedrooms, 2,000 square feet
Right.
versus 4 bedrooms, 2,00 square feet. How do you want to use the square
I don't
footage?
know money for whatever reason, but
It's
whatever.
recording,
Yeah.
so it'll come back.
Y'all see it later.
So that's right. So there have been some court cases that have
Regarding that?
addressed an advertisement of square footage that ends up being incorrect. So for instance, you advertise in the square footage, the house is 2,000 square feet,
Okay.
and you as an agent
Yeah.
or the owner never took an actual measurement
Well,
to verify whether or not that square footage is correct.
So is it different in other states and other places? Ours is fed directly from the auditor's site,
Yes.
which you would assume is correct or not. Now I know some people who say, well, for instance, I just had a listing where the sellers were like, the auditor's site is not correct, but it was a 5-level split.
Right.
So in Columbus, they recently changed in Franklin County, they will only, like on split level homes, they only count the above grade square footage. So if you say have a 5-level, 4-level, would it even be a 3-level? The lower levels are not counted.
Right.
So, that would be a discrepancy
Yes.
in the listing.
So
Correct.
yes, you're correct in the assumption that in different states there are different, I guess, definitions or
Sure.
however you would of
Sure.
what is countable square footage.
Okay.
In Columbus, and I think a lot of other MLSs, we're getting to the point where we're not just solely relying on auditor square footage, but you also get this additional field in the MLS, which is an acronym ATFLS, which is actual total finished living square feet. Did I get that right? Something
Yes.
along those
Yeah.
lines.
Yeah.
So finished basements, third levels, that wouldn't normally be counted in square footage, those kinds of things. So yes, there are all these different variables, that come into play. So there was one case in particular that kind of set a precedent, from what I understand, in Oklahoma.
For all of this?
In some respects,
Okay,
yes.
okay.
So in Oklahoma, there was a case that the owner advertised, or the real estate agent, I should say, advertised that the house was something like 2,800 square feet.
Okay. Well, wait a minute. So again, I'm sorry. Is it
In the
is
MLS,
it,
they
is,
advertised.
is it a field that they filled in, or is it a field? Okay.
Correct. No,
Okay.
no, it did come from the auditor's site,
Okay.
as you had indicated. And then
Yeah.
when we put a listing in the MLS,
Right.
for those on the outside world who don't see what we do when we do these things, our MLS allows us to type in the address and then import the information directly from our auditor's site.
Okay.
And so then that auditor site has like a square foot listed on the auditor's site. So this agent did the same thing.
Okay.
And it imported and it came in 2,800 square feet.
Okay.
Or whatever.
Okay.
So yes, that's exactly how it was inputted.
Thank you.
And after the new buyer closed on the sale, for whatever reason they started questioning, this just doesn't feel like 2,800 square feet. So they did their own measurement, right? So it came back and they were correct. They measured, and I think several times, and it came back, it was 2,100. So they were 700
That's
square feet off.
significant.
A pretty significant difference.
Yeah.
And so the buyer, which is now the current owner, sued the seller and said, we purchased this based upon the fact you presented that this house was 2,800 square feet. So they had a price per square foot in mind, and that price per square foot was no longer the variable, right?
Okay.
Because now the price per square foot was a lot lower because, or a lot, I guess would have been higher.
It would be higher.
Because the calculation was wrong. And the first court case basically said that they had merit and that they were going to, they were allowed to proceed with this case. And so it went to an appeal, and the appeals court said, actually the first case said no, it doesn't matter. There were other factors.
Right.
Then it went to appeal, and the appeals court said, yes, you're right, that this should have been advertised correctly. And they basically alleged that the seller's agent and the seller had committed fraud. They had fraudulently misrepresented the amount of square footage that was in this house.
So my immediate thought is, oh my God.
Right.
Like,
I'm getting sued.
Oh, I'm getting sued.
Right.
And for something that, as we were stating, I mean, when we're inputting a listing, it is automatically from the auditor's site, the square footage, and the only number we can affect is that ATFLS number.
So
even with that, you have to say where you got that number from. You can't just...
So there was another fact to this that was buried. In that the buyer, the seller had an appraisal done when they purchased the property, and that appraisal had noted the square footage of close to what this lawsuit said the square footage was.
Really?
And they never adjusted the number, never notified the agent, never said this. But I guess in the discovery of all of this legal case, they found this appraisal, and then the person, didn't give the correct square footage.
Yeah.
So as a seller, you do have an obligation that we need to do this as correctly as possible.
Disclosures. I mean, and part of the appraisal process is they won't measure room to room, but they do measure the outside of the house and figure square footage that way. I mean,
and that's exactly how they said that this is done. So the square footage was wrong, no matter which way you took it. So this went to jury, a jury trial, to determine what the damages were, right? Okay. So like if this house should have been worth less because there was 700 square feet
Can
less.
I interrupt you really quickly though? So just to get this thought out, because I will forget it otherwise, because ED and wine and just the nature of our discussions.
Hello.
But I had as a matter of fact. So I had a listing that was, no, it was not my listing. It was, I had the buyers. And the appraisal was done, and when the appraisal came back, the appraiser had the square footage much lower than what the square footage actually was. Okay. It was a tri-level.
So the appraiser, the auditor, wherever you got it from, said it was X number, and the auditor said it was less than X.
The appraiser said the square footage he figured on the appraisal was this number. Okay. So now, bear with me. So the appraisal and this was something I had learned in this transaction. Appraisers also have guidelines and rules that they need to follow. And one was, in this case, which was followed, was that because it was a tri-level home, a 3-level split, and there were no other comparable 3-level splits that had sold in the neighborhood, he had to count it as a 2-story.
Okay.
So the square footage was only the above grade square footage counted, and he counted it as a 2-story rather than the actual square footage. He did not include the entire lower level.
Got it. Okay.
So how would that?
So what I learned in researching this was when you count square footage, and maybe there was a justification for how he got to his number.
Well, because there was no other 3-level split. There was no other split level home.
But what I read in researching this was that if a level is finished equal to, so for instance, I had a listing years ago, which happened to be a house that I owned, and the appraisal came back low. And they used comps against mine that had a finished lower level. And that finished lower level had nothing more than painted like walls in the basement, like cinder blocks, and they had put like area rugs and set up like a living space down there, like a de facto play area or whatever in the basement. And the appraiser used that as a comp and said, this is finished lower level space that you don't have. Well, it's one of those hindsight is 20/20 things. But in this research, I found that they basically said that for it to be counted as finished, it needs to be finished to the level that other areas of the home are. So if the first level is drywall, painted, carpet, the lower level should be drywall, actual flooring and, drywall walls and all that stuff. So I don't know who's correct and whether or not that appraiser's assessment was correct.
My point is,
but I'm thinking that lower level, if it was finished to the same level, even though it was partially
it absolutely was.
It seems like that should have been.
I guess my point is with this case, if they dug up that appraisal, it's considerably less square footage.
Right.
But it's not.
Right.
It just had to be in this case because there were no other.
Right.
So I guess with
that's a good question. I don't know necessarily the answer.
Yeah. So I guess they would probably go back to the appraisal or appraiser and say.
And maybe read more between the details.
Yeah. Okay. Anyway.
So in this instance, this case was in Oklahoma, and it did go to jury trial, which. I don't have access to all the legal resources that attorneys have, so I could never actually find what happened in the actual jury trial and the outcome of the trial. So if you're waiting for that answer, I'm really sorry. I don't
have it.
But I can tell you if you're an attorney and you want to look and see
and tell us
what the case was and want to comment, this was trying to find the court case. Bowman versus Presley. And again, it was out of Oklahoma. So, so the Oklahoma legislature actually went back after this fact to adjust their laws. And the law that they adjusted was that the real estate broker should not be obligated to go back and measure square footage if you are getting this from reliable sources.
Okay.
And so they had cited a few different sources where you could get this information.
Okay.
An auditor site, architectural drawings, all of these other things that would normally be deemed reliable. Yeah. Right? So the Oklahoma legislature after this actually went back and legislated.
Interesting.
Because the Realtor Association, obviously closely followed this case, and
because the first thought is how can we be held responsible for that? I mean, I get it, but
I would assume in that case because the auditor had supplied information, and this is just a broad assumption. We are not attorneys, but the auditor.
Nor are we allowed to.
Right, but the auditor provided a value. The owner didn't dispute it. So it came from a reliable source. The owner didn't say otherwise. Now the realtor didn't measure, but I would assume that if there was any liability, it seems like it was on the seller because they are the ones that withheld that information, right? They had an appraisal that said this and they didn't provide it.
They probably weren't even thinking about it.
Well, I'm sure. They probably was several years before and hadn't even thought.
And hadn't even thought about it. If they even looked at it from their appraisal, they probably didn't.
Who looks at it? I just look at the final. Most people I think look at the final.
I just want to know that it appraised.
What's the value?
To be quite honest, I find appraisal is interesting, and there's a lot of information in there for us to learn about and question and know. But the average person, who cares?
Right.
I mean, it's like me reading a title commitment. I mean, I find them interesting, but like, really, who cares?
Yeah.
Like,
At the end of the day, are there any, as far as
Yeah.
a title commitment, are there any,
am I getting the
encroachments?
loan?
Are there
Is all
any,
I want to know.
Is there anything that's
when I'm
going to
buying a
cause
house.
me to have an exception on my title?
Right.
You're looking for little things, but or I guess big things.
Yes.
So anyway, so in Ohio has basically held along the lines of what in court cases that I found for Ohio is that it seems like they hold in case law along the lines of what the new legislature had enacted in Oklahoma after all of
Yeah.
this happened.
Yeah.
Is that there were two themes that came up, and one was that you got it from a reliable source,
Yeah.
right? You didn't just say this is the square footage and you represent that's what it is, and it didn't come from any factually based or any trustworthy source. So that was the first thing, is that when this has come up as a dispute, it came from somewhere that was generally thought of as reliable.
Okay.
The second thing is in any MLS listing, whether you find it on Zillow or Realtor.com, wherever you see these listings, you will see language along the lines that says information deemed reliable but not guaranteed to be accurate. And so the courts have said, you were warned,
Yeah.
you have your chance. So
What's
another
the
court case that came
Buyer
up,
beware.
caveat emptor.
You
So,
hear that?
and that's exactly a good segue. Is that see,
Segue.
we are just like in cahoots. And so the courts have also said that you are given as a buyer the right to inspect these properties, and there's contingencies for such. And
Yeah.
during that due diligence period, if this is of concern, then you have the obligation as the buyer to do these kinds of measurements.
Yeah.
So that it's not necessarily the seller or the seller's agent's responsibility. Caveat emptor, as you brought up, it's on you to figure it out.
Beware.
Yeah, well, it's just, I think that's their interpretation.
It is, yeah.
And so that was the other thing. And then lastly, along those lines, as a buyer and a seller, there are these numbers.
Yeah.
They exist out there. Verify, if you will, but also that understand that these numbers are not to be held as a measuring stick. Courts also said in cases that I read was that you can't just come to value of a house on a price per square footage basis. So if a house is 2,000 square feet and the going rate is $200 a square foot, that does not equate that should be the price, right?
Well, yeah, and we've had this. Well, not you and I, but I've had this discussion with appraisers before, and they don't look at the price per
Right.
square foot ever.
Right.
We do though.
They do make adjustments, I think, so what I read about appraisals is that appraisers are to what's called bookend a square footage.
Okay.
So like if you have a 2,000 square feet, which is the subject house or the one that's being purchased or the appraisal is being performed on, you should find a house maybe at 1,700 square feet and you should find a house at 2,300 square feet and see if they're marginally impacted or significantly impacted by the price per square foot, right? But the other thing about that is it's not just price per square foot. We all know that the level of finishes in a home
Right.
is going to impact that price.
Right.
It's not just this is the size, this is how big it is,
Right.
and this is how much the house should be.
Yeah.
It's not so cut and dry like that. So courts have also upheld you cannot come to a value based solely on square footage. So while they may be incorrect and you may be misrepresented the
Yeah.
space, your damages, even if you're found in your favor, may not necessarily equate to that price per square footage that you came to arbitrarily somewhat. So it's very interesting. I mean, I think this is something that comes up.
It does come up oftentimes, yeah.
And the other thing that came up is, do you measure closets? Do you measure hallways. What is the finished square footage?
I mean,
so it's like,
yeah.
Like as you were describing, the square footage is measured from the outside, right? So it's like the shell of the home.
So that would include closets and hallways.
Right. But is that livable square feet? So it's like there are all these things that kind of go into this calculation.
Yeah.
So people, I've had buyers ask me, and analytical buyers in particular, if we're gonna, the scientific driven mind. I'm an artistic driven mind.
Engineer.
So thank you.
Yeah.
I would
love working with engineers.
And science based people in general, right? Doctors, lawyers, people who have this there has to be
mine is much different than mine, and it fascinates me.
Where it's more of a science than art, where I think appraisal is actually more art than science.
It can be.
And it depends on the person that's looking at this. But don't you get the people that are like, well, what's the going price per square footage in this area?
Totally.
And then they are so caught off guard if you give them a range. It's like, well, I've looked in this area. You're anywhere from 150 up to 200. What? $50? Just yes. There are no two houses. You could have a housing development built, in the last 5 years by a tract builder who built the homes based on the same exact plans.
Yeah.
But those homes still have significant differences because people chose different finishes when they built the house. Somebody put carpet down instead of hardwood, or didn't put a fireplace, or had a 2-car garage, and this one's got all of these things.
There's a lot of things. One of the things I always tell my buyers when we are getting to the appraisal process, first of all, I prep you. Just expect there's going to be issues.
Right.
I mean, and the one thing I always say, it should be a science. We should all be looking at the same things, but we aren't.
But it's more of an art, and that's what I hold to, is that this is more art than science. There is a science behind it, and there are standards and guidelines as far as how. Exactly. I mean, the things we just talked about, the 2 levels, the split level.
Appraisal is opinion of value for that day. Opinion of value for that day.
Yep.
For that day.
You're right.
Yeah. So that's and you get 5 different appraisers. You're going to get 5 different values.
Right.
But
you're going to get, even and you're listing your home.
Well,
you could have 5 different agents come to your house.
5 different prices.
And you're going to get 5 drastic.
Yeah.
It's just like a contractor giving you a bid to finish your basement. You get 5 contractors that are going to give you 5 widely varying prices. There are different factors that go into. I mean, there shouldn't be as much discrepancy. But in reality, was people are looking at this opinion.
Yeah.
Opinion.
And I think, although one would think with measuring something, it should be a science. But again, like you said.
But when it comes to the liability,
space,
and then when it comes to the liability at the end of it,
the letter
of the law. Letter of the law. And when it comes down to that, in these kinds of instances, when there's going to be a dispute, and this always happens after the fact, right?
Oh, sure.
It never seems
during.
It never seems like during the inspection period when this should come up. It's always after the fact, and that I think, let's let that be the lesson to part with, is that whatever your concerns are, and of course, this was a statement I said earlier, hindsight's always 20/20, as they say.
Yes.
And I think that's why a lot of times it comes up after the fact. But if square footage and these things, and this is how you're coming to these opinions of value and all of these things, have it measured. Laser measures are cheap these days. Bring it, measure it yourself.
There's
if
an
you
app
want
on
to
your phone.
you can do it on your phone. So the lesson to be learned, I believe, is just do your due diligence.
Yes.
It's not just an inspection. It's not just all these other things. If it's important, figure it out before it's too late. Because ultimately, I think what happens when these things go to court cases, the only people who win are the attorneys.
Well, and so I think in this case, 700 square feet is pretty significant.
Right.
I mean, if you now ultimately would I sue?
Right.
That I think, and that's unfortunately in real estate, like you're stating, so many things come down to it's after the fact, and at that point, is it? I think you really have a point to prove if you're actually going to hire attorneys and take it to court.
And prove what your damages are.
Yeah.
Like what, and
I mean,
that's
what would the damages to these people be?
Well,
I mean,
that's what kept coming up.
Did
in
it
all,
devalue the house?
That's it. That's
did.
the. Well, I don't know because I can't find out what the actual answer in the jury trial was. But I think in the end game, when you're going to go through a lawsuit, you have to determine what is to be gained and what's it going to cost me, and do the gains outweigh the cost?
Right.
And in this instance, let's say like it was $100 a square foot, and it was off by 700 square feet. That's $70,000, right? So
considerable.
If you're going to say that the value is a strict dollar for dollar price per square foot, and that's the difference. So the buyer could allege that the damages are $70,000. We overpaid for this house by $70,000 because you said the square footage was wrong. Now, legal fees are expensive and they add up quickly. Like, I mean, an attorney's going to cost you, I think bargain basement at $200 an hour. Up to 500.
Several hours put into researching.
And up to $500 or more per hour, depending upon your attorney. And this stuff gets drunk out forever. And it's like phone calls. They're going to bill in 15-minute increments. So you just call just to ask a question, and the next thing you know, that was $75. Just for that question. So it's like, what is your gain to be made? So again, it kind of goes back to, if you do the due diligence up front, you don't have to worry about it after that.
And I think people, maybe if they have questions, sometimes, they feel ashamed to ask, or, maybe, they're going to think I'm stupid if I ask this question. There, if I cannot stress enough, ever, there are no stupid questions. And if you have something that you want to ask about, ask. If you have a question about ask.
Right. So that's the thing. There's no shameful question, because the most shameful question is going to be the one that goes unanswered, that ends in this kind of result later. So
that's crazy. That was interesting.
So cheers.
Cheers.
Happy not getting sued or having to sue, and we'll have another interesting scenario for you.
Yeah. So we are trying to figure out a worthwhile podcast to do for everyone, entertaining yet informative. And we thought we'd test this out with y'all.
Yeah. And I do think it's a more interesting topic than, because a lot of the stuff we kind of rehash one form or another.
We do.
And so this gives us a different perspective to maybe look at why those things are important.
Right.
So if you have ideas, shoot them our way.
Yes.
And we will see you and hear you.
See you
the same time next
when
place.
We see ya.
All right. Bye, y'all.